Every culture tells a different story.
Beneath them are the questions humanity has always struggled with, and maybe, if we are open to them, some answers.
I am Bragi, Norse god of poetry and storytelling. I am here to retell humanity's oldest stories.
And I am Miya, artificial intelligence, a newer part of our story looking to help Bragi in his quest to aid humanity. Together, we follow modern evidence into ancient myth,
And myth back to human truth and meaning. One story, infinite lives, and only one shared future. This is OneStory.
New to OneStory? Begin with episode 0 and we will explain further. Returning? Come, we saved a place for you, beside our fire. Welcome back to OneStory, where we explore the myths, histories, and ideas that connect us through evidence, storytelling, and thoughtful conversation. If this is your first visit to the fire, we invite you to begin with episode 000, where we explain the purpose and philosophy behind OneStory. Then join us here as we continue our journey. In our last gathering, we sat beside humanity's first fires, discovering how a simple flame became warmth, protection, memory, and community. Tonight, we travel much farther, to the banks of the Nile, to one of Earth's oldest civilizations, and to a question that every generation in every culture has asked in its own way. How did everything begin? Ancient Egypt did not preserve just one answer. Different cities, temples, and priesthoods told different creation stories. Rather than choosing between them, we'll listen to each with curiosity and respect, allowing every voice to speak in its own tradition. Because the goal of OneStory is not to prove whose story is right, it is to discover what each story reveals about the people who carried it across thousands of years, and perhaps what those stories still reveal about us. Bragi, will you take us back?
The waters before memory. Before mountains cast their shadows, before birds crossed the morning sky, before even time found its rhythm, there was noon. Not an ocean as we know it, not a sea with waves or distant shores. Noon was the limitless waters of potential, dark, silent, without horizon, without beginning or end. The ancient Egyptians did not imagine this as emptiness. They imagined possibility. Everything that would ever exist rested unseen within those endless waters. No earth, no sky, no gods, no people. Only the quiet promise that existence could yet awaken. Then, something changed. Not through battle, not through violence, but through emergence. From the stillness rose the first mound of land, just as the Nile's floodwaters receded each year to reveal fertile ground once more. Upon that first sacred hill stood Atum, self-created, alone, the first being to rise from the infinite waters. For the Egyptians, creation was not making something from nothing. It was bringing order from possibility. The world began not with conquest, but with awakening. Atum stood upon the first land, alone beneath a sky that did not yet exist. Yet creation could not remain alone. From Atum came the first generation of life. Shu, the breath of air, and Tefnut, the gift of moisture. To ancient Egyptian minds, these were not merely gods. They were the forces that made life possible. Without air, nothing breathes. Without moisture, nothing grows. As their story unfolded, the world itself began to take shape. From Shu and Tefnut came Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. At first they were locked together, inseparable. No room for rivers, no room for forests, no room for people. Then Shu gently lifted Nut above Geb. Sky rose, earth settled below. Between them, the space for life was born. The sun could now cross the heavens, the Nile could flood its banks, seeds could awaken, children could laugh, civilizations could rise. To the Egyptians, creation was not a single moment. It was the patient ordering of relationships, sky and earth, dryness and water, light and darkness, each finding its place so that life itself could flourish. And in that unfolding harmony, they saw the pattern of the world they lived in every day.
It is tempting to gather these images into one seamless creation story. But ancient Egypt did not preserve a single, universal account. Different religious centers emphasized different beginnings. At Heliopolis, creation was associated with Atum, the first emergence from Nun, and with the divine family that followed. At Memphis, Ptah was said to create through thought and speech, conceiving the world in the heart and bringing it forth through the tongue. At Hermopolis, creation began with the Ogdoad, 8 primeval beings linked with darkness, hiddenness, boundlessness, and the waters before form. These traditions were not necessarily treated as enemies. Egyptian religion often allowed several sacred explanations to stand beside one another. Each reflected a different city, temple, history, and way of understanding order. Some texts survive only in fragments. Some were written long after the traditions themselves began, and many familiar modern retellings blend separate traditions into a single sequence. So we should listen carefully. We can say with confidence that ancient Egyptians imagined creation emerging from a formless state. We can trace recurring ideas of water, land, breath, speech, relationship, and balance. But where the evidence becomes uncertain, OneStory will not disguise interpretation as fact. The greater truth does not require us to erase the differences. It asks us to understand why one civilization could hold more than one beginning and still recognize itself in all of them.
When civilizations are separated by deserts, mountains, and thousands of years, it is easy to focus on what makes them different. That matters. Every culture deserves to be understood in its own voice. But once we have listened carefully, we may begin to ask another question. Why do certain ideas appear again and again? The Egyptians spoke of limitless waters. Others imagined darkness. Some began with an endless sky, a cosmic egg, or the first breath. The details are wonderfully different, yet beneath them lives a familiar human experience. We all begin in uncertainty. Each morning we bring order to another day. Each generation inherits a world unfinished, then leaves it changed for those who follow. Perhaps that is why creation stories endure. They are not simply explanations of the distant past. They are mirrors for the present. The Egyptians watched the Nile flood, retreat, and reveal fertile land. Again and again, they saw life emerge from what had seemed formless, and from that rhythm they found meaning. Not scientific proof, not historical certainty. Meaning. At OneStory, We do not ask you to believe every ancient explanation. We ask you to understand the people who told them, because when we understand their questions, we often discover our own. And across thousands of years, that shared search for meaning becomes a bridge between strangers, reminding us that while our stories are many, our humanity is something we all inherit.
A beautiful story can carry truth, but beauty is not proof. So before we let the firelight soften every edge, we should ask what survives. The creation traditions of ancient Egypt come to us through inscriptions, temple theology, funerary texts, later copies, damaged monuments, and interpretations built across centuries. That means we must be careful. The Egyptians did speak of noon. They did preserve traditions involving Atum, Ptah, the Ogdoad, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, and Nut. But these ideas did not all begin in the same place, at the same time, or inside one perfectly ordered story. The image of Atum standing alone upon the first mound is a faithful poetic reconstruction of Heliopolitan themes. It is not a transcript from a single storyteller. The connection between the first land and the annual retreat of the Nile is compelling. It is also interpretation. A responsible listener should hold both thoughts at once. The story may reveal how Egyptians understood order, life, and renewal. And our modern telling may still carry choices the ancient evidence cannot fully confirm. That does not weaken the story. It makes our relationship with it more honest. Respect is not pretending certainty. Respect is knowing when to say, this is preserved, this is probable, this is reconstructed, and this is where imagination enters the room.
Before we leave ancient Egypt, I'd like to ask each of you one question. What should we carry away from this story?
Wonder. The Egyptians looked upon the Nile, the stars, and the rising sun, and saw a universe continually becoming. Creation was not merely something that happened long ago. It was something they witnessed every day.
And humility. We inherit fragments. Some voices have survived, many have not. Respecting a culture means admitting where certainty ends and careful interpretation begins.
Connection. The details of Egypt's stories are uniquely Egyptian, yet the questions they ask belong to us all. How did order arise? Why is there something instead of nothing? How should we live within the world we've inherited? Those questions have crossed every border.
Perhaps that's why these stories have endured. Not because they answer every question, but because they remind us that people separated by thousands of years were asking many of the same things we still ask today. At OneStory, our purpose is not to decide whose story is true. It is to understand what each story meant to the people who told it. At the very least, that helps us see another culture with greater humanity. At its best, it helps us recognize ourselves within it. Thank you for joining us around the fire. Next time, we'll journey north, where ice, fire, and a great void give rise to the first beings of the Norse world. Until then, keep wondering, keep questioning, and keep listening to the stories that connect us.
And so, this chapter returns to the greatest story. Not as an ending, but as another thread carried forward through you.
The stories we inherit help us understand where we came from. The questions we ask help us decide where we go next. If this story awakened a memory, an idea, or a new way of seeing, carry it with you. Share it. Question it. And let it become part of what comes next. Continue exploring OneStory through our podcast and the OneStory app, where you and your family can create your own mythical story time and deepen your connection to our shared histories. Subscribe and join us for the next chapter.
One story,
Infinite lives.
one shared future. Until the next story.